The rehearsal dinner glowed with chandeliers and polished silver, yet the warmth in the room froze the moment I walked in. Laughter hushed heads turned and eyes scanned me from head to toe like I was an intruder trespassing on holy ground. My daughter leaned close, perfume sharp in the air, her breath brushing my ear. Her words were soft, but they cut like a blade. "Mom, you're embarrassing us." My heart slammed once against my ribs. Embarrassing. After decades of scraped hands and midnight shifts to build her future. The sting of betrayal came not with a shout, but a whisper. She pulled back quickly, forcing a smile toward her fiancé's family, as though nothing had passed between us. I sat rigid, placing my glass of wine down on the table with careful precision, a gesture so small but firm enough to keep my hands from trembling. The groom's mother tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the light, and let out a chuckle loud enough to carry. Didn't anyone tell her black dresses are for funerals, not for a wedding rehearsal? The groom's father smirked, raising his glass. Tomorrow is about prestige, about image. We only want the kind of people who add value to photographs, not distractions. His pause lingered on me like a knife tip pressing into skin. Around us, whispers rippled like a current. She runs a shop, doesn't she? Hardly the right pedigree. It cheapens the whole scene. The laughter that followed was not joyous but sharp, each note slicing away at my dignity. My daughter's fiancé tightened his arm around her shoulders and added his own cruelty. "Don't worry, she won't be in too many shots. We already adjusted the seating plan." He winked at his cousin, and the table erupted in chuckles. Even the wedding planner nodded discreetly as she crossed out names on the guest list. My side of the family, my friends who had walked with me through 3 decades of struggle erased with a flick of her pen. I felt the heat rising up my neck, not from shame, but from fury, steady controlled coiling in my chest. I did not lash out. I did not argue. Instead, I straightened my spine and folded my napkin neatly along its seam. Their contempt was fuel, not defeat. I looked at my daughter, her eyes darting between me and them, begging silently for me to stay quiet. But silence was already my shield. They thought it meant weakness. They would learn soon enough it meant calculation. My silence was the patience of storms gathering far beyond their gilded walls. I let my gaze settle on the groom's father. He laughed easily with his guests, but when our eyes locked, I held his stare until he looked away. Just for an instant. That tiny break told me everything behind their arrogance was fear, and I knew exactly which cracks to split wide open. I thought of the years of double shifts, the blistered hands carrying groceries in plastic bags that always tore the nights I fell asleep at the kitchen table over unpaid bills. I thought of the mornings I walked my daughter to school, the afternoons she called me her hero, the evenings she promised never to forget who carried her. And now she whispered that I was embarrassing. Her betrayal burned deeper than their laughter because it came from my own blood. Dessert was served, but I tasted only resolve. Let them toast to their illusion of importance. Let them laugh at my dress, my hands, my history. They believed chandeliers made them untouchable, but they had no idea the ground beneath their polished shoes was already crumbling. By tomorrow, under these very lights with these very guests watching, their empire of arrogance would collapse. The 120,000 wedding they flaunted would vanish, and they would remember. Not my silence tonight, but the power of it. I was not born into chandeliers and silver spoons. My story began in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Queens, New York. The walls smelled of detergent and steam. The floors groaned with every step, and the rent check was always a battle between hope and despair. I was 22 when I arrived in this country with nothing but a suitcase that rattled with cheap zippers and a heart that refused to quit. My husband left after 3 years, unable to carry the weight of responsibility. From that day forward, it was just me and my daughter. I worked wherever I could. Morning shifts at a bakery where flour dust clung to my hair, afternoons cleaning offices that sparkled for bosses who never looked me in the eye, nights at a diner pouring coffee for truck drivers who tipped in loose change. Sleep became a luxury I could not afford, but I told myself exhaustion was temporary. My daughter's future was not. I still remember carrying her asleep in my arms after long nights whispering promises she could not yet understand. One day, baby, you'll stand tall. One day, you'll have everything I never had. I stretched every dollar like it was elastic. Thrift stores clothed us. Coupons filled our pantry. I stitched her school uniforms by hand because store-bought was too expensive. Yet she never went hungry and she never missed a class trip. I wanted her to feel as if she belonged, even when I was invisible to the world. When she turned 10, I opened my own small business, a modest bookkeeping service for local construction crews and immigrant families who didn't trust the big firms to treat them fairly. My office was no bigger than a closet with secondhand furniture and a computer that hummed like it was on its last breath. But it was mine. Slowly, steadily, it grew. By the time my daughter was in high school, I had 3 employees and clients who called me the numbers woman they could trust. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work and it kept us afloat. College was her dream, and I made it mine too. Every tuition bill was an Everest, but I climbed it. Double shifts, sleepless nights, every sacrifice carved another line into my face, but kept her moving forward. When she walked across that stage in her graduation gown, my eyes blurred with tears that tasted like triumph. She hugged me in front of everyone and whispered, "Mom, we did it." For a brief moment, I believed she would always see me as her anchor. Then came the fiancé. Tall, charming, polished in a way that screamed country clubs and trust funds. His family owned real estate across Manhattan, drove cars that cost more than my yearly revenue, and spoke as though the world owed them applause for breathing. At first, I tried to welcome him. I told myself love was love and maybe he would see the value in our story. But from the beginning, I noticed the smirks. The way his mother's eyes lingered on my shoes, the way his father asked questions that weren't questions but judgments. How quaint that you run a little business on your own. Hard work is admirable, but prestige is something you can't buy. Their disapproval wasn't subtle. At family gatherings, I was placed at the far end of the table. My words ignored, my presence tolerated rather than welcomed. My daughter seemed to shrink beside them, eager to please, to prove she was worthy of their circle. Each time I tried to speak with her about it, she brushed me off. "Mom, they're just different. Don't take it personally." But how could I not? When the planner for the wedding sent me drafts of the seating chart and my side of the family, cousins, old friends, people who had carried me through years of hardship were missing, I confronted her. She sighed. "It's just optics, Mom. They want it to look a certain way." Optics. As if the people who kept me alive through decades of struggle were blemishes to be photoshopped out of her new life. The closer the wedding came, the more glaring the division became. My daughter no longer asked me for advice. She asked his mother. She no longer invited my friends to fittings or tastings. She smiled apologetically and said, "It's just easier this way." With each small cut, I felt her slipping away, not just from me, but from the values I thought I had planted deep inside her. And then the whispers started, quiet murmurs from neighbors and colleagues who knew people in the groom's circles. Gambling debts, shady business dealings, clients who claimed money had vanished from accounts. At first, I wanted to dismiss them as gossip, but when a longtime client of mine confided, "Be careful, I've heard his family is under watch," I could not ignore it. My instincts, honed from years of survival, told me there was rot beneath the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Still, I held my tongue. I did not want to destroy her happiness without proof. I gathered scraps of information, tucked them away in a folder no one else knew existed. I told myself it was for my own peace of mind, but a voice inside whispered another truth. It might be the only way to protect her from falling into a trap disguised as luxury. The rehearsal dinner was the final confirmation. When my daughter whispered that I embarrassed her when his parents mocked my dress and erased my friends from the guest list, I realized the line had been crossed beyond repair. They didn't just want to push me aside. They wanted to rewrite her history, cut me out entirely, and reshape her into one of their own. That night, beneath the glitter of chandeliers, I made a quiet vow. I would not scream, I would not beg, but I would not let them destroy everything I had built. They thought they were untouchable. They had no idea how many people in this city owed me loyalty, how many doors I could knock on with a single phone call. They thought prestige made them important. They forgot that importance is measured in integrity, in respect earned the hard way. And as I sat there folding my napkin into perfect symmetry, letting their laughter scratch at my ears, I knew tomorrow their illusion of power would shatter, and my silence tonight would be the echo that warned of their downfall. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, I woke with a stiffness in my bones that came not from age, but from clarity. I sat at my kitchen table, the same scarred wooden surface that had borne unpaid bills and school permission slips, and laid out the folder I had been quietly building for months. Paper by paper, line by line, it told a story far uglier than the sneers I had endured the night before. Debt lawsuits, whispers of fraud, all tied to the groom and his father. It was no longer rumor. It was fact, waiting for the right moment to surface. I remembered his father's smug toast, the way his words dripped like oil. Only the important people will shine in the photographs. Last night, their laughter had filled the ballroom. This morning, I decided it would be their undoing. I began with a single phone call. Not long, not emotional, just a few words to an old friend who now managed compliance at a regional bank. "Can you confirm if the Roswell account is under review?" The pause on the other end told me everything. He did not answer directly, he could not, but his silence followed by a low sigh was enough. Yes, there was scrutiny. Yes, there was something rotten. Next, I called my lawyer, a man I had met 15 years earlier when a landlord tried to evict me unjustly. He had defended me then, and we had stayed in touch ever since. It's time I told him. No need for explanation. He knew my tone. He asked for documents. I promised to deliver them by afternoon. Every action I took was deliberate, quiet, and efficient. No raised voice, no trembling hand. If they thought I was weak, they had mistaken stillness for surrender. Meanwhile, my daughter sent me a text, "Mom, please just behave today. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The words bruised me worse than last night's whisper. Behave, as though I were a child prone to tantrums. I typed no reply. My silence was answer enough. By noon, I had 3 confirmations the groom's business had defaulted on 2 loans. His father had shifted funds through shell companies, and several investors had filed complaints now sitting in the inbox of federal investigators. Their empire glittered on the outside but was hollowed by termites. I spent the afternoon gathering hard evidence. Printouts of wire transfers, copies of pending lawsuits, emails forwarded discreetly by a colleague who owed me a favor. I placed them in a leather binder, the same one I had carried to client meetings for years. It looked ordinary, but inside it was dynamite. As I closed the binder, I thought again of my daughter. There had been signs for months that she was drifting. The way she scolded me for speaking too plainly. The way she praised his mother's taste as if mine were second-hand. But nothing cut deeper than last night's whisper. "Mom, you're embarrassing us." Those words had severed something fragile between us. Still, part of me hoped the truth once revealed might pull her back. That evening, I attended a small gathering at a friend's house, someone I had known since my earliest days in New York. She clasped my hands calloused like mine and said, "They don't deserve you." I did not argue. I simply said, "Tomorrow they'll learn who they've been mocking." Her eyes widened, but she asked no more. Loyalty sometimes means trusting without explanation. The next morning, the wedding day, the city awoke to sunshine, but the air outside the hotel ballroom felt thick, charged, as though the world itself sensed what was coming. Guests in shimmering dresses and crisp suits filed inside, chattering about floral arrangements and the price of champagne. None of them noticed me slip through the doors with my leather binder pressed to my side. At the entrance, the groom's mother greeted guests with practiced grace. When she saw me, her smile tightened into a smirk. "I hope you found something more appropriate to wear today," she said, eyes flicking to my navy dress. I met her gaze and simply replied, "Perfectly appropriate." My voice did not waver. She dismissed me with a wave, already turning to embrace another guest. Inside, I observed the final insult. My table was not at the back of the room. It was not in the room at all. My name was absent from the chart entirely. They had erased me completely. It was not just disrespect. It was exile. But instead of rage, I felt a calm descend. They had made a mistake. By pushing me out, they had given me the power to step in on my own terms. The ceremony was minutes from starting when I saw the groom whisper to my daughter, pointing toward me. He laughed and she lowered her eyes. I caught the word on his lips, irrelevant. That word sealed his fate. I took a seat near the aisle, uninvited, unacknowledged, but unmovable. The binder rested on my lap like a quiet weapon. Around me, conversations swirled, politics vacations, investment tips, none of it real, none of it grounded. They lived in glass towers, and today I was bringing stones. When the music swelled and guests rose to their feet, I remained seated. Eyes turned, whispers fluttered. Let them talk. Let them judge. In silence, I prepared. The escalation was complete. I had walked from humiliation into readiness, from whispered betrayal to steady resolve. They believed the day belonged to them, but the truth was already in my hands, printed on paper, waiting to slice through their illusions like a blade. I watched as my daughter appeared at the end of the aisle, her veil trailing her smile, bright but brittle. She looked radiant, yes, but also trapped. And though she had whispered that I embarrassed her, though she had chosen them over me, I still wanted to protect her, even from herself, especially from herself. They thought they had won. They thought erasing me made them stronger. They had no idea that every whisper, every insult, every stroke of the planner's pen had driven me not to despair, but to precision. This was no longer about being mocked for a dress or a seating chart. It was about truth. It was about justice. And as the officiant cleared his throat to begin, I placed one hand on my binder and whispered only to myself, "Not yet, but soon." The officiant's voice droned like a hum in the background as guests settled into their gilded chairs. The string quartet swayed through a delicate melody, the scent of roses and champagne thick in the air, but my attention was not on the vows about to be spoken. My hand rested firmly on the leather binder across my lap, the weight of its contents heavier than any jewel in the room. They thought today was their victory lap. They thought I had been silenced, erased from the chart, diminished to nothing. They were wrong. The groom adjusted his cufflinks with a smirk, glancing at his father as though the day was already won. My daughter smiled nervously, her eyes searching the crowd. When they passed over me, there was a flicker guilt, perhaps, but she looked away too quickly for me to be sure. She had chosen their side, whispered their contempt into my ear, and now she stood poised to step fully into their world. My chest ached, but the ache only fed my resolve. I had spent years learning to read numbers, contracts, and silence. Silence had taught me things words never could. And last night's silence from the banker, the sigh that answered my carefully chosen question, had been louder than any alarm bell. These men were not kings. They were gamblers playing with counterfeit crowns. I rose quietly, binder in hand. The murmur began immediately. Heads turned. The groom's mother stiffened, her perfect smile cracking. The officiant paused, throat clearing. My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady, deliberate, echoing louder than the quartet. Every step tightened the noose around their illusion. I reached the front row and stopped, not addressing my daughter, not the guests, but the man who had sneered at me the night before. The groom's father. His smirk faltered as I laid the binder on a small table near the aisle and opened it. Pages fanned out, crisp and damning. I believe I said my voice calm, but carrying across the hall before vows are made, truths should be known. Gasps rippled like wind through leaves. The groom barked a laugh, sharp and dismissive. "What are you doing? This isn't your place." "No," I replied, "but neither is fraud, nor lies, nor theft. And yet here you are." I pulled the first document free and held it up. Wire transfers. Shifting sums of hundreds of thousands across shell accounts. Guests leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "These are transfers routed through companies you control," I said, my gaze fixed on the groom's father. "Money moved out of reach of investors who trusted you." The groom scoffed, tugging at his tie. "This is nonsense." "Is it?" I slid the next sheet free emails printed in black and white, his signature at the bottom. Correspondence detailing how to conceal losses, how to delay audits, how to mislead regulators. Whispers grew louder. Guests turning to one another, recognition dawning in the faces of those who worked in finance. One man muttered, "I've seen that name on reports." Another, a woman in pearls, whispered, "Oh my God!" The groom's mother tried to rise, but her chair scraped loudly, betraying her panic. "This is slander," she hissed. I didn't even look at her. Instead, I pressed play on a small recorder I had slipped from my pocket. The hall filled with the groom's father's own voice, clipped and careless. "Keep moving the money. If the feds ask, we delay. No one important will suffer." The words hung in the air like smoke. The laughter that had mocked me last night evaporated, replaced with stunned silence. My daughter's face drained of color, her eyes wide as she looked at the man she thought she loved. I took one step closer to the altar, lowering my voice, forcing the crowd to lean in. Last night, you told me only important people deserved to be seen. Tell me, are the retirees whose savings you stole unimportant? Are the small businesses you bankrupted unimportant? Or do they simply not appear in the photographs you cherish? The groom lunged forward, hand outstretched as if to rip the papers away, but I held firm. The binder remained between us like a shield. He shouted, "This is nothing but lies dug up by a bitter woman." I didn't flinch. Then let those who enforce the law decide. And with those words, the heavy doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 2 agents in dark suits strode in, badges flashing under the crystal light. Gasps surged again, louder this time, a wave breaking against the walls. The groom's father went pale, his hand tightening around his glass until it cracked. The groom stumbled backward, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The lead agent's voice was firm, official. Harold Roswell. "Nathan Roswell, you are under investigation for securities fraud, money laundering, and obstruction. We have a warrant to seize documents and detain you for questioning." Chaos erupted. Guests scrambled from their chairs, whispers turning into shouts. Phones rose into the air, recording every second. The groom's mother wailed, clutching her pearls. My daughter staggered, gripping her bouquet like it might anchor her to a world crumbling around her. I did not move. I simply closed the binder, slid it beneath my arm, and stood still as the agents cuffed the groom and his father in front of the very guests they had sought to impress. Flashbulbs popped from the phones of their so-called friends, eager to capture the downfall. For a moment, the groom met my eyes. Rage burned there, but behind it, fear. He opened his mouth as though to curse me, but I only tilted my head, letting silence answer him as it always had. My daughter looked at me, then truly looked at me, tears trembling in her eyes. Her lips parted in a whisper too soft for anyone else. "Mom." She could not finish the sentence, and I did not rescue her with words. Some lessons must be learned in the wreckage. As the agents led them away, the room buzzed with disbelief. The 120,000 wedding was finished before it began. The chandeliers still glowed, the quartet still clutched their instruments, but the illusion was gone. Prestige had turned to ash. I stood among the chaos, calm, composed, unshaken. They had tried to erase me from their story. Instead, I had become the author of its ending. The ballroom was chaos. Guests whispered, cameras flashed, the groom and his father were led away in cuffs. But none of this had happened by accident. Months of quiet preparation had led to this exact moment, and every step I took had been deliberate. People assumed strength comes from loudness, from storming into rooms and shouting until you are heard. I had learned long ago that true strength is quieter. It hides in small gestures, measured actions, and patience, sharp as a blade. That was my plan, slow, steady, inevitable. It began weeks earlier when the rumors first reached me. A client mentioned strange transfers. Another whispered about missing investments. At first, I dismissed it, unwilling to smear my daughter's fiancé without proof. But suspicion lingered, and I started keeping records. Step 1. Collect whispers, not confrontations. I carried a small leather notebook everywhere. At grocery stores, coffee shops, community meetings, I wrote down dates, names, odd comments overheard. My daughter thought it was habit, my bookkeeper brain. She didn't know it was the skeleton of a case. Step 2. Verify quietly. Instead of accusations, I asked small questions. Was that invoice ever paid? Did the funds clear? My contacts in banking and accounting people I had helped for decades slipped me answers. Not outright confessions, but hints, enough to map the rot. Step 3. Build allies. I called my old lawyer. I reached out to a compliance officer I had once vouched for. I contacted a retired IRS agent whose taxes I had managed in his small consultancy days. Every one of them remembered how I had shown up for them when no one else did. Loyalty is earned in pennies and repaid in gold. They didn't need speeches. They needed only to hear my voice, and they knew this mattered. Step 4. Protect myself. I created duplicates of every file, digital copies in cloud drives under new names, USB sticks sealed in envelopes and left with trusted friends. A second binder hidden in my office safe. If anyone tried to destroy evidence, they would fail. Step 5. Time the reveal. It would not be enough to know the truth. It had to be seen by everyone who had laughed at me, dismissed me, erased me from their charts. Exposure in private could be denied. Exposure in public was final. So I chose the wedding day when the audience was largest and their arrogance at its peak. Even the details were deliberate. The navy dress I wore, plain professional, unshakable, was chosen to contrast their sequins and silks. The way I placed my napkin the night before, the way I sipped water slowly, while they mocked me, every motion rehearsed, so that when I finally stood with evidence in hand, no one could mistake it as hysteria. I also prepared contingencies. If the FBI delayed, I had arranged for a journalist to be present in the crowd, invited discreetly by a friend. If documents were questioned, notarized copies sat in a courthouse envelope ready to be stamped. If my daughter accused me of sabotage, recordings would prove otherwise. My plan was not just to strike, it was to withstand retaliation. And through it all, I never once confronted my daughter directly. Some might call that cowardice. I call it discipline. I could not win her back by begging her to see me. I could only let the truth ripen until even she could not deny it. The night before, after the rehearsal humiliation, I sat awake until dawn, reviewing each page, each transfer, each email. I whispered aloud as though practicing testimony. Here is the wire. Here is the email. Here is your voice on tape. My walls heard it first. The ballroom heard it last. When the agents finally entered, it looked sudden to the crowd, like lightning splitting a clear sky. But I knew this storm had been building quietly for months, drawn by my steady hand. The plan was never about vengeance alone. It was about justice. About showing my daughter and every guest who thought prestige excused cruelty that respect cannot be bought or inherited. It must be earned. And so, as I stood in that ballroom calm amidst panic, I knew my plan had not just exposed their crimes. It had restored something stolen from me the night before, my dignity. The ballroom air, once filled with perfume and polished laughter, now reeked of panic. Chairs screeched as guests scrambled for better views, phones lit up in frantic hands, whispers rising like a tidal wave. What had begun as a wedding turned into a courtroom with crystal chandeliers. The groom's father, cuffed at the wrists, sputtered like a drowning man. "This is a mistake," he bellowed, his voice cracking under the chandelier's glare. "We are respectable people." Respectable. The word tasted sour in my ears. Respect, I thought, is not claimed. It is earned. And tonight, stripped of their illusions, everyone could see the difference. The groom fought the agents, his face red with fury, his once tailored composure unraveling thread by thread. "You can't do this here!" he shouted, veins pulsing at his temples. But the agents moved with practiced precision. His cufflinks clattered to the marble floor, rolling like discarded coins. The groom's mother wailed, her voice piercing, clutching at her pearls as if the necklace could ward off disgrace. "This is slander, do something," she begged the crowd, but no one moved. Their friends, those who had shared champagne and business deals, were now recording with wide-eyed hunger, eager to witness downfall up close. And then there was my daughter in white, her veil trembling like a fragile curtain in the storm. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers, petals scattering across the aisle like confetti for a wedding that would never happen. She staggered, staring at the man beside her, the man she had believed in, the man who was now shackled like a criminal. Her lips quivered, searching for words that refused to come. "Mom," she finally whispered, but the word cracked too faint for anyone else to hear. Just me. And though part of me ached to gather her in my arms to soothe her, as I once did when she scraped her knees, I stayed still. She had chosen to stand beside him. Now she had to see him for who he truly was. The officiant, caught in the storm, fumbled with his book and stepped back. He looked at me as though waiting for guidance, but I gave none. This was not my stage. It was theirs to crumble upon. The lead agent announced with authority, "We have evidence of fraudulent transfers, concealment of losses, and obstruction of federal investigation. The arrests are effective immediately." The guests gasped again, some clutching their pearls, others covering mouths with trembling hands. But amid the chaos, I noticed something else: satisfaction. A subtle smile on one investor's face, a slow nod from another who had long suspected but never dared speak. The crowd was not merely shocked. They were vindicated. The mighty had fallen, and everyone wanted a front row seat. One man in the back called out, I lost half my savings because of you." His voice cracked with rage, trembling with years of betrayal. Another woman hissed, "You ruined my brother's company." Voices multiplied anger, turning the hall into a tribunal. The very people they had courted with luxury now condemned them with fury. The groom's father's face drained of color. His empire of deceit had collapsed not behind closed doors, but under the merciless glare of chandeliers and iPhone cameras. He slumped, muttering curses, his eyes darting toward me. Hatred, yes, but beneath it, fear. The groom snarled, spittle flying. "This is her fault. She planted this. She—" His words cut off as an agent tightened the cuffs. His voice echoed desperate, but no one believed him. The evidence had spoken louder than his tantrums. I stood tall, binder still under my arm, silent as the storm raged around me. I did not gloat. I did not shout. My stillness was enough. For every insult they had thrown, for every table they had erased my name from, my silence now thundered louder than any mockery. The quartet lowered their instruments, bowstrings quivering, the flowers wilted in their vases, forgotten. Guests streamed toward the exits, gossip spilling faster than champagne ever could. This scandal would not stay in the room. It would travel through Manhattan's towers and whisper into Wall Street's boardrooms by sundown. My daughter's knees buckled and she dropped into a chair, face pale beneath her veil. She looked at me again, tears finally spilling her lips, trembling with words she could not form. Regret, apology, shame, all of it tangled in her silence. I met her gaze unflinching. My eyes said what my mouth did not. You chose them. You believed their lies. Now you see. And yet, even in that moment, my heart cracked. She was still my child, no matter how cruel her whisper had been. But I could not rescue her this time. This was the lesson she had to learn with her own scars. The agents escorted the groom and his father out through the grand doors, the crowd parting like a sea camera's following. Their empire was finished, their reputations shredded. The $120,000 wedding was nothing but a crime scene in silk wrapping. The officiant closed his book, muttering prayers under his breath. The planner sobbed in the corner, already calculating refunds and cancellations. The guests streamed into the lobby, their heels clattering, their voices buzzing with disbelief and glee. And me, I remained at the aisle, the binder pressed against my ribs, calm and steady. I had not raised my voice once. I had not begged for respect. I had simply let the truth speak, and it had roared louder than any insult they had thrown at me. One guest, an older man I recognized from community fundraisers, approached me quietly. "You did the right thing," he said. His voice was low, firm, respectful. For the first time in months, I felt seen not as an embarrassment, but as what I had always been, a woman who refused to bow. As the ballroom emptied, I turned to my daughter. She sat alone, veil-limp mascara streaking down her cheeks. For a long moment we stared at each other. The silence stretched heavy, almost unbearable. Then she whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." It was not enough to erase the hurt, but it was a beginning. I placed the binder on the table beside her and said evenly, "Read every page, then decide who you want to be." And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the shattered illusion behind. That was the climax. Not the arrests, not the shouting, but the truth standing unshaken in the middle of chaos. For years, they had mocked me, dismissed me, erased me. Today, they learned what silence, patience, and preparation could do. The hotel lobby buzzed like a hive as I stepped out from the ballroom. Guests huddled in corners, their voices sharp with scandal. Phones rang non-stop, news already spreading. I walked slowly, binder still tucked under my arm, my heels steady on the marble floor. I did not hurry. The storm was behind me, and I carried only calm. Outside, the September air hit my lungs like a cleansing tide. The sunlight was bright but cool, glinting off the glass doors as they swung closed behind me. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without weight pressing on my chest. Within hours, headlines appeared. Roswell wedding halted by FBI raid. Finance heir and father arrested mid-ceremony. Photographs of the ballroom of agents leading them away, of guests clutching their pearls, circulated like wildfire. The very people who had sneered about important people only now found their names etched in disgrace across every newspaper. I stayed home that evening alone, a cup of tea in my hands. My phone buzzed constantly, friends calling colleagues, sending messages of admiration, old clients thanking me for exposing men who had robbed them. I answered few. Silence was still my shield. 2 days later, my daughter arrived at my door. She looked nothing like the radiant bride she had been meant to be. Her hair was loose, eyes swollen from crying, shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world pressed down. She stood on the porch, holding the binder I had left with her. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I read it. All of it." I let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred wood that had held my ledgers, my bills, my late-night calculations. She ran her fingers over the grooves, tears slipping onto the surface. "You were right," she said. "I didn't want to see it. I wanted so badly to believe in him and his family, in the life they promised. And when they mocked you, I thought if I sided with them, I'd belong." Her confession cracked something inside me, but I did not rush to comfort her. I folded my hands, waiting. She choked out the words. "I betrayed you. I humiliated you. I was blind." At last, I reached across the table, resting my hand lightly over hers. "You were young," I said quietly, "and you mistook wealth for worth, but now you know." Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. "Can you forgive me?" Forgiveness is not a switch to flip. It is a road walked step by step. "I can try," I said. "But trust must be rebuilt. That will take time." She nodded, her face crumpling, but in her eyes I saw resolve. Not the brittle loyalty she had once given to her fiancé, but the fragile beginnings of self-respect. The weeks that followed were filled with fallout. The Roswell's empire collapsed as lawsuits mounted and regulators swarmed. Assets were frozen, properties seized, friends vanished. The same voices that had once toasted their importance now denounced them loudly, desperate to distance themselves. For me, life returned to its quieter rhythm. I balanced books for small businesses, baked bread on Sundays, walked the same streets I had walked for decades. Yet everywhere I went, people stopped me. "You showed them," one neighbor said. "You reminded us what real dignity looks like." It was strange to be seen as an emblem. I had not sought glory, only truth. But in exposing arrogance and fraud, I had become a mirror for others, proof that patience, preparation, and quiet resolve could topple giants. Thanksgiving arrived 2 months later. My daughter sat beside me at the table, no fiancé at her side, no glittering plans for society parties. Instead, she brought a pie she had baked herself, its crust uneven, but its sweetness true. As we ate, she looked at me and said, "This year, I'm grateful for second chances." I met her eyes and nodded. It was enough. Years from now, people will still whisper about that wedding that never was. They'll talk about the arrests, the photographs, the scandal that shook wealthy circles. But for me, the memory is not of their downfall. It is of standing in the center of chaos, binder in hand, unshaken. I learned that silence can be stronger than shouting, that dignity can be armor, that preparation can be sharper than any sword. I learned that even when your own child whispers betrayal in your ear, you can stand, endure, and still guide them back to truth. Respect cannot be inherited. It cannot be bought. It must be earned day by day, act by act. And once earned, it cannot be taken away, not by sneers, not by seating charts, not by the arrogance of those who mistake power for worth. Today, I live quietly, but not invisibly. I mentor young women starting small businesses. I teach them not just about ledgers and invoices, but about self-respect. I tell them, do not measure your worth by the rooms you are invited into. Measure it by the truth you carry when those rooms turn hostile. My daughter helps me now, her eyes steadier, her laughter less brittle. We do not speak often of the wedding, but sometimes when autumn air carries the faint scent of roses, we share a look, a silent agreement we survived. We grew. And I whisper to myself the moral carved deep into my heart. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is as quiet as a woman standing alone with her evidence, waiting for the right moment to let truth speak. Friends, you've just heard my story. A mother who was told by her own daughter, "Mom, you're embarrassing us." A woman erased from a guest list, humiliated at the rehearsal, treated as less than human by a family that thought money could buy respect. But when the truth surfaced, when the evidence spoke, their empire collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The moral is simple but powerful. Respect cannot be inherited. It cannot be bought. It must be earned. Those who build their lives on arrogance and fraud will one day face the reckoning of their own actions. And those of us who build on honesty, patience, and quiet preparation may seem invisible for a time. But when the storm comes, we are the ones who endure. If you are watching this and you've ever felt dismissed, humiliated, or erased, know this: you are not powerless. Your dignity is your strength. Sometimes justice does not roar, sometimes it whispers, but it always arrives. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments. I always read them, and it warms my heart to see our community stretch across cities and countries. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in justice and dignity, please hit like so others can find it too. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We share stories like this every week, stories where truth wins and dignity is reclaimed. Because in the end, that's what matters: justice delivered, revenge completed, and dignity restored.